everyone, welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, a podcast for all disciplines, paths, players and game masters, and the questers that are Josh and Dan. I am Dan.
I am Josh.
And on today's podcast, there'll be a lot of coughing going on, but I'll try and edit all that stuff out when you guys actually get to hear it. But other than that, today we are going to talk about all things liberational and talk about the path of the Liberator. Not the best word, but I'm going to go with it because it's going to be fun that way. Sometimes they're cringeworthy, sometimes they're great. Can't all be winners. Well aware of that. But if you have any questions for us, please feel free to contact us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. And we should just kind of get right into this one here. This was the one we were supposed to do 2 weeks ago, and then the internet crashed, and yeah, nobody cares. Anyway, on to the Liberator, which used to be an orc-only path.
Yes.
And I think some people who are very passionate about orcs, maybe Kogorsi will let us know exactly how upset he is now that anybody can be a liberator and not just orcs. And it's no longer orcs are special about liberation, but now everybody can do it. But I think the more the merrier. I believe that being a liberator is a better path than it was ever a discipline because now anybody can join that cause.
Yeah.
And it's more appropriate that everybody join that cause.
Sure.
The more allies you have, the better.
Discussions that we've had in the past about the racial disciplines or the lesser disciplines from previous editions.
Yeah.
There was some discussion. We talked about the Traveled Scholar the other week about how it didn't really feel like something that was particularly dwarfy in its outlook.
Yeah.
The Liberator does in some ways in the original version play up to one aspect of orcish history in the sense, and that is the idea that the orcs were the slave race.
Yes. Or the predominant slave race.
Yeah, or were predominantly the slave race, and that the Liberator was originated with Hrak Gron way back in the earliest days to free the orcs and to found their own nation, and that the Liberators became something that was a true driver of, at least to a certain extent, Barsavian orc culture. But when it came time to look to 4th edition and having the Fire Eater get conceived as being the sort of more orcish path, and also, as you said, the idea that the struggle for freedom, the struggle against slavery, is something that doesn't necessarily need to be exclusively orc. That while orcs in Earthdawn were predominantly a slave race, or are sort of considered a slave race, other name givers are slaves as well, and I don't see any particular reason the magic that drives someone to the end of pursuing a discipline, or in the case of 4th edition, a path, needs to be something that is exclusively racially tied. I think the philosophical and magical underpinnings of that are something that could conceivably be followed by anybody.
There's a line in the essay, beautifully done essay, by the way, that says, oppressors have many victims. So therefore, if it's not just orcs as the victims, why wouldn't everybody else be allowed to be a liberator? So just based upon the essay itself, it should be broadened to include all in any name giver race, who wants to join. And I think that's quite appropriate.
I think it's still perfectly fair to consider that probably the majority of liberators are orcs because of that cultural background that goes along with orcish nature. But anybody who feels the call to fight against that and has the capability could conceivably follow that path.
My other favorite parts of the essay were that, and these are very good quotes, every fire starts with a spark. And what I mainly took away from the essay itself is that the Liberators as a group pattern and as a culture in and of themselves, aside from whatever discipline they follow or practice, that Liberators stand for freedom and fairness. And so they're there to fight against oppression and unfairness at every turn. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's a fairly fair assessment. One of the things that you might notice if you compare the essay in 4th edition, I don't recall offhand whether the Liberator got an essay in 3rd. I know some of the lesser disciplines did, but I didn't go back and check to see if there was a Liberator essay written for 3rd edition. I know there wasn't one previous to that. But
Fair.
the thing that you might notice is that the previous versions of the discipline were heavily involved with actual physical slavery, largely fighting against Theron slavery, because that is the slavery of Earthdawn.
Yeah.
We've talked in the past about how certain paths can really shape and influence the type of game that you're going to be running. That if you've got a horror stalker, for example, you are going to have a game that is, to a certain extent, going to have a lot to do with the horrors. In the same way that some disciplines like the air sailor, might end up kind of shaping the game to be around airships, or other paths or disciplines will kind of show you or influence the direction of the game. One of the things I think that was attempted with the newer version of the Liberator, with the Path version of the Liberator, is to expand its capability and the area of its interest and influence to be more than just literal physical slavery. That it tries to address oppression and tyranny in other forms,
many forms
as well. The idea being that a town or a village under the rule of a tyrannical individual, those people that are there and subject to that situation are slaves in a way as well. They may not literally be wearing chains, but there are metaphorical chains, there are barriers, there are systems in place that prevent them from expressing their inherent freedom and
fairness,
stuff like that.
Yeah. No, there's always, usually there's some form of economic oppression. Somebody's hoarding all the goods or doling out what they think is fair to them and unfair to everybody else. Or there's some kind of a systemic creation of oppression as far as they're running a small dictatorship in that town. There's no democracy. Nobody can vote. It's just their way or the highway and things like that. So I think the Liberator would look for any and all forms that they possibly could.
Yeah. And it's an effort to expand the number of potential stories that a Liberator would want to be involved in. That if there is the possibility of freeing individuals, even in some kind of metaphorical sense, that would be something that they would be interested in. It doesn't, again, have to be literal people showing up, slapping people in chains and dragging them off and selling them at a market. Though, that is certainly still a possibility as well.
Absolutely.
It's not even necessarily that the Liberator is in favor of democracy, because I think democracy, at least as we understand it in the present day, or at least as it's sort of conceived of, is not something that's really quite to that same extent in Barsave. I mean, the Kingdom of Thrall, which is in some ways a beacon of hope and positive ideals and whatnot, is still a monarchy and is still an absolutist political system with nobles and all sorts of other things. And there's a lot of inequity and various other things that go on in that society.
Yeah.
It's the question of, is the leadership of that society, whether it's an entire kingdom, whether it's a city, whether it's a small village, is the leadership in that society doing right by the people that they are in charge of? Are they taking care of their citizens? Or are they exploiting them? Are they taking advantage of them for their own benefit and advantage, and not really concerned with the downstream effects or what might happen to people who are not part of the elite ruling group?
Yeah. I was just using democracy as the alternative in the example I provided, which is the tyrannical part over there.
Yeah,
but
no, absolutely. Absolutely. And part of that is there is a tendency as sort of modern early 21st century people and ideals and notions that we have will invariably bring into a fantasy setting, into a setting that has a different socio-political setup, and make some judgments about that don't necessarily have to hold true 100%.
Completely fair. There is an in-game update to the progression from first edition to fourth edition in the essay itself that page 67 says, this focus shifted with the end of the Second Theron War, and now the majority of liberators seek liberation for not just slaves, but for all name-givers who suffer under the yoke of tyranny. So there's an in-game dialogue, or diatribe, I guess, about the focus not just being orcs anymore against slavery, about we've broadened the group pattern to include everybody who now sees, oppression and injustice and unfairness everywhere they possibly can. So I love the fact that the essay got to work the whole thing in as well, just for the sake of update.
Yeah, and again, that is an effort to honor the past of the game and the sort of previously established material, where it's been sort of several years and there have been developments, and that this new ideological discussion that is being had within the Liberator community is something that on its own could drive story. Because we're talking about paths which have a much more involved and rigid structure in some ways, and NPCs that will authorize or approve advancement or induction into the path. Those kinds of role-playing opportunities and story hooks where you might have competing factions that, while on a broad scheme, are all pointed in the same direction. The exact means by which they try and achieve those goals and what they consider to be worthy or unworthy goals at any particular moment can certainly vary from individual to individual. I'm reminded a little bit of Monty Python's Life of Brian and the obviously satirical sketch involved of all the various, liberation groups fighting against the Roman occupation, and how they are all like super similar except for their names and the problems that come about as a result of that. Obviously, we're not going for the full satirical, humorous bent of it, but that is certainly a possibility that you can have some division within a group that is as potentially diverse as the Liberators and go from there.
Yeah, I would look at this as an opportunity to, again, ROLE play the character who's seeking to become a Liberator and their viewpoint on whatever interaction they're in, whatever political or socioeconomic situation they happen to be in for a town, the Kingdom of Thrall itself, and where and when they can see that oppression and how they would fight it, and maybe drag everybody in their party along with them to understand their point of view. So a lot of in-character discussion / argument about what they perceive as the setup and where they see the oppression, unfairness, and how to address that. And if they can convince their other party members to go along with it, that would be the interesting setup for the role-playing as far as that's concerned. So, your dice stay off to the side a little bit, but here's your interaction tables maybe for the game master and a lot of in-character discussion. So I always welcome those conversations in character.
And you're still ultimately, with a Liberator, going to have a game that is on some level going to have themes of fighting slavery, whether that is physical or metaphorical, dealing with oppression and unjust systems. And there's a lot of similarity and crossover that you could potentially have with Questors of Lochost or Mynbruje even, to try and address those situations. And obviously, followers and questors of Dis would be a notable adversary in those sorts of situations. That's all stuff that can be milked. Again, this is one of those paths that's going to be dealing in some ways with the direction of the campaign and is not necessarily as flexible or willing to just kind of go along with whatever if there isn't something that can justify their objectives as a follower of the path.
So would this be one where, so I have two parts here. Let's think of some other pop culture references we can possibly say about that person would be considered a liberator, or at least along a liberator path. How's that? So think on that one for a quick second or so. Let your subconscious work on that one. But secondly, would somebody who's seeking that path in a group, so your gaming group, you're not the game master, you're the player who wants to maybe become a liberator. And as you begin to convince other people that I see this injustice, I want to go fix it, I want to join this path, how often do you think somebody else in that group might want to go along with them and join this liberational thing? So do you think maybe the whole group would want to join their own like liberator group pattern?
That's certainly a possibility and would be an interesting hook or idea. Yeah. If rather than having just one member of the group be a liberator, you have multiple members, like that is a ready-made campaign hook and does make it a lot easier in some respects to get people to go along with what you want.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a consideration. The other thing that comes to mind is the general thrust that I always have of communication between the players and the game master and what kind of game you want to have.
Yeah.
Just as if somebody is going to be playing a horror stalker, they're saying some things about what they want in the game, and the other players should be willing to negotiate the degree to which that is appropriate or relevant for their desires, and dealing with that not in character, unless people want to deal with it in character, but definitely to deal with it out of character, like ahead of time, and say, I'm not against this idea coming up from time to time, but I don't want it to be the sole focus of the game. In much the same way that you might say, I don't want to have the entire game just be about care delving. Say you want to play a troubadour. Like, I don't want to have a lot of this be just mucking around in empty tombs where some of my abilities just are not going to come into play at all.
Exactly.
And so there needs to be some willingness to negotiate, to give a little, to take a little in terms of what is going on. Anytime that you've got one character whose entire reason for being and entire purpose for doing what they do exerts such a large amount of narrative gravity that it reduces the spotlight time and the ability for other players to get moments for their characters.
Yeah.
When you're hampering the fun of the other people at your table for the glorification of your player character, there is a potential for issues, and it's just something to be aware of.
Fair. If your subconscious has worked on it at all, back to question 1, can you think of any pop culture references or real life references, for pity's sake? There have to be over the last couple thousand years somewhere.
Spartacus comes to mind as a sort of legendary / historical figure who could have been considered a liberator, did lead a slave revolt. Didn't end up going well for him ultimately, but certainly that would be one that would qualify.
Oh, yeah. William Wallace, Braveheart.
William Wallace. Historical issues with the film aside.
Yes.
That is a character that could conceivably have been on the path of the Liberator.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to go a little bit more philosophical, you could talk about someone like Princess Leia from the Star Wars series, who is leading the rebellion against the Empire.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking like Gandhi.
Gandhi, yeah. That's an interesting take because of Gandhi's nonviolence.
Yes.
And that's something that generally is not an aspect of the Liberator path so much.
True. I was just saying for inspiration,
Certainly, I think it's something that is a little bit more possible with the 4th edition version, with the path version of the Liberator, when we start getting into the
Agreed.
optional talents and so forth that they offer. The original version, the orc racial version of the Liberator, was almost certainly not pacifist. Because one of their key abilities, and it's still a key ability, is to hoard up the abuse that they receive at the hand of a slave master and unleash it back at them.
Yes.
Gandhi certainly would be an interesting approach. How might you approach a pacifist liberator? And is that something that is possible sort of within the framework of what they get access to and so forth? That's an interesting question. It hadn't actually occurred to me. But anybody whose raison d'etre, whose sort of reason for being well known is tied up in the idea of freeing people, whether from literal slavery, if you want to talk about people like, say, Harriet Tubman. Or the other, abolitionists that were involved in fighting against American slavery in the Civil War, or those who are fighting against oppressive regimes, say the
Greenpeace.
Greenpeace, although they're one that I would consider less of liberator, because a liberator, I think, goes more against social and political systems.
Fair.
Whereas Greenpeace, I would more strongly align with, say, like a purifier.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because they're more interested in the natural world aspect of things.
I'm just tossing out as many ideas as I can to see if you can
that's
kind of parse
cool.
out where they go from there.
I hear you.
How about PETA?
Say the French resistance during World War II.
There you go.
And the attempts to break people out of camps, whether POW camps or concentration camps.
Absolutely.
So there's certainly some aspects there. Unfortunately, while there are plenty of positive examples of that, more often than not, the stories that kind of stick around with us are the ones that don't end up well for the Liberator. I mentioned Spartacus. William Wallace, likewise, did not come to a good end. And I think that may be an indicator of what ends up happening with a Liberator. Because these kinds of systems and practices can't ultimately be defeated, that the fight never ends, and eventually they get to a point where they go up against a struggle that they can't win.
And part of that responsibility is maybe to inspire the others to do so, to join in that fight. And so I'm going to borrow a phrase. You're swimming toward the horizon of the change you want to see done. You may never reach there, but you're causing this wake behind you that everyone else is should be swimming toward as well. So if you're the first one there, you may not live to see the benefits of your labors, but you're the spark causing that fire to create that change. We went through a whole bunch of examples. I have like 2 more just in case, so I'm going to toss them at you. Malcolm X, Liberator.
Malcolm X would fall under that umbrella, in contrast to, say, Martin Luther King, who, like Gandhi, had a much more sort of nonviolent approach. Malcolm X and associated folks of the civil rights movement, like with the Black Panther Party and so forth.
Yes.
Very definitely not, we are going to passively resist, but we are going to actively fight back and take control of our lives and our dignity and our communities in the face of oppression. Unfortunately, not often as successful as we might have wanted in some regards.
Agreed.
I don't know why I phrased it that way. That's a really... I think you know what I mean, though.
I was going to say, if you want to rephrase, we can cut.
I'm not even sure where to pick up on that, so that's fine. We'll just go with me. My recognition that that's really awkward and not quite what I meant to say.
We're okay there. If we get any questions, we can clarify later on, but I think everyone will understand what we're going for. We got that. So let's go ahead and kind of dig into... We're about halfway through the episode, so we can kind of dig into the actual mechanics of the game here, of the Liberator a little bit. And yes, they do welcome other disciplines. really kind of, illusionists, because the illusionist discipline allows you to see through someone else's guise.
Yeah, because one of the key aspects frequently of the illusionist discipline is to get to the truth. And one of the ways that tyrants and unjust systems perpetuate themselves is through propaganda and misinformation, and the illusionist can be very, very good at seeing through that.
Yes.
Piercing the veil or exposing that, quote unquote, that the emperor has no clothes.
Not that any other discipline is not allowed, because all of them are allowed, but illusionists tend to prefer to follow this path and tack it on to their regular discipline because it enhances everything that they're already learning under their discipline. But really, there's a couple that not so good with the Liberator, which is the Sky Raiders, Beastmasters, and Nethermancers.
Yeah, well, kind of taking those in that order, the Sky Raider, as described and as sort of traditionally presented within the framework of it being very heavily tied into Highland Troll, Crystal Raider style culture, is the focus on strength and personal strength, that any who are not able to hold on to something didn't deserve it in the first place.
Yeah.
That's kind of an awful view in some regards, that, oh, well, the reason that you're a slave is because you don't have the strength to stand up and not be a slave is kind of a shitty one, quite frankly. But
no argument here.
Within the framework of the traditional Sky Raider philosophy, it is one that is understandable, if not condonable.
Yeah.
And then the Beastmaster and the Nethermancer tend to have their focus and their concerns elsewhere.
Yeah.
I could see a Beastmaster who would extend a little bit into Liberator type, because frequently in a society where, if they're more of a city-based Beastmaster, or a sort of domestic animal-related Beastmaster, of which there are plenty. Not typically player characters, but there are examples of them in the setting.
Yeah.
A society that is oppressive to people is typically also not great for animals, and so might want to see reform happen in that regard, but still doesn't seem to me to be something that would push them to embrace the full path. I mean, there are possible exceptions, certainly. Yeah. And then Nethermancers are frequently concerned with the worlds beyond and the potential life beyond.
Mm-hmm. Not really concerned with the here and now.
Yeah. Again, not that they are necessarily unfeeling or uncaring and unwilling to help people out. It's just not likely to be something that is such a philosophically significant aspect of their life that they will devote a significant portion of their magical attention to it.
Yeah, it's not in their top 5 things to get done every day. Probably not. So, again, not that any discipline is verboten or forbidden from tacking on this path, just some are less inclined. One is really inclined, so everybody's, of course, welcome to do so. They do welcome, all kinds of passions. If you want to be a quester at the same time, mostly Lochost.
Yeah, Lochost primarily, Mynbruje secondary.
Yeah. Otherwise, they kind of conflict a little bit with the idea.
You're not going to find any followers of Dis among the Liberators.
No, I think they're diametrically opposed.
Because you need to get approval in order to join the path, the people that are inducting you, the people that are testing you, the people that are deciding whether you're going to be allowed to join this organization or not, are going to be very careful to make sure that they're not allowing somebody who's like an infiltrator or somebody who is going to be trying to take them down from the inside and secretly a devotee of the passion of slavery and bureaucracy and pointless oppressive systems. I mean, if there is one thing that is said to stand in stark contrast to the ideals of the Liberator, it is, as I mentioned before, a follower of Dis.
Dis, yeah. No argument here. But other paths, by the way, are also not forbidden or a bad idea. So the Fire Eater, the Journeyman, Scholars, all of those, if you want to follow two paths at the same time, those three would line up quite well.
Yeah, the Fire Eater is almost a given.
Kindred spirit, at least.
Yeah, because of the orcish connection and the strong orc connections with slavery.
Yeah.
And were the strong orc connections with the Liberator in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
The Fire Eater would be very strongly interested in getting orcs in particular to embrace their inner fire and use that to drive themselves to freedom and so forth.
Yeah.
The Journeyman just being a kind of jack of all trades, master of none. You run into the problem, like some of the people have said in the emails, that the Journeyman, because quite frequently they are focused on dabbling in a bunch of different things, probably don't have the dedication to be both a Journeyman and a Liberator, because a Liberator requires a certain amount of focus on a particular philosophical goal that can kind of run into issues with the Journeyman. I don't think that Journeymen have issues working with Liberators and vice versa. I think that Liberators can find the diverse toolkit that a Journeyman can bring very useful when it comes to achieving any particular goal.
Yeah.
The Scholar, again, there's no particular conflict there, but the goals of the Scholar are a lot more academic and would be an interesting approach in terms of how is a scholar going to be trying to further the goals of dismantling abusive system. What are their research projects going to be? What are their academic focuses going to be? You're talking about sociology and political theory and stuff like that, maybe, where
economics.
They're involved in legal matters to some extent.
Yeah.
Again, I think there is some potential for alliance there, but in terms of someone actually following both paths at the same time, there's a conflict there that might not necessarily be resolved particularly easily. That the Liberator is a path of action to a greater extent than a Scholar would be, for example.
I agree. Scholars seem less inclined to take action. They're there to inform so others can take action. Whereas the Liberator probably needs to take more action than having the information at their ready. So upon finding or deciding to become a Liberator, to join that path, to go, this is my cause, this is my purpose in life, finding a Liberator to take you under their wing, going to be a little hard sometimes, but what they're looking for is the player character especially has to be more or less selfless, very passionate, and highly idealistic. Yeah.
The Liberator in general is an idealistic path. It is one that is devoted, again, to the ending of slavery,
oppression
in general, and in a more general sense. And so Liberators are going to be looking for people that have that strong drive and ideology to achieve these ends that do not have an obvious short-term endpoint. Yes, we may liberate this mining camp. We may liberate the enslaved workers at this Theran mine, but that doesn't put a stop to the slave trade. It doesn't put an end to the systems in place in the Theran Empire itself that benefit the noble houses in terms of slavery and the economic wealth and power that it brings them. And so those who would have the desire to continue that struggle in the face of insurmountable obstacles and difficulties.
So there are kind of two initiation rituals or ordeals. There's the old school, and then there's the new school. Do you want to go into those?
If I had read the chapter beforehand, I'd probably be able to do it more easily.
No, fair. I haven't either. So the old school, in the old days, initiates were led blindfolded to a holding cell devoid of light, noise, and name-giver contact. Along the way, they were ridiculed to feel small and powerless. With nothing more than a jug of water, they were left alone with their thoughts for 3 days. This was meant to remind, if not teach, each liberator what it was like to be unheard, unseen, and uncared for. In their time of need, all the Forsaken are their thoughts and their sense of self-worth. These days, the new version, we view finding a way out of a hopeless situation as more inspirational to a young liberator. Similar to before, 2 initiates are placed in 2 adjacent holding cells, but they are left with makeshift tools to escape, not a key per se, but pieces to make or get one, like making a pole or retrieve a key from a wall. Each initiate kept in darkness by an iron mask, forcing them to cooperate. They must learn to communicate and share the tools they have to free each other without having any prior knowledge of one another or their surroundings. They are given 1 day to find a way out. This teaches the liberator to keep their hope alive and to have faith in the common name giver. So, just 2 different schools, the old school and the new school, of initiating one onto this path and the lesson they want to teach them and the perspective they want to give them as they begin their journey.
Yeah. The old school liberator is one that is very much, it is you against the world, and you are often acting alone in the face of the things that you are struggling against. The new school is much more of a, hey, yeah, it's difficult, but you don't have to be alone. In fact, it's not something that you are going to be able to achieve on your own. It is something where you need to work with others and find a common purpose and goal and work towards it.
Bring them to your cause, if you're the leader. So either way, it is personalized to the player character's view on how they want to enter this and the Game Master's idea of how they want to present this as well, since the Game Master has to play the rank 5 liberators who need to initiate and approve of the ordeals. So that's going to be, working out with kind of a session 0 type thing with, okay, session 0 for assimilating this path into your discipline. Here you are. But after that, this is kind of a different blood oath than most other paths because there's a blood peace oath sworn.
Yeah, the Liberators are a bit more hardcore in terms of the oath that they require. That being that you are not supposed to go against other Liberators. Despite the philosophical differences that might come up, ultimately they all share the same goal.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit more serious, and there's quite a bit of sort of sidebar advice and commentary that is given sort of out of game in terms of being a Liberator is tough. You need to be careful who you associate with.
Yeah.
Are you knowingly associating and being friendly with a slaver?
Yeah.
That's kind of like a big no-no.
Yeah,
And to what degree, if your companions, if your adventuring company is not one that is along the same lines or has the same objectives, ultimately, what are you going to tolerate from them in terms of their turning aside from situations? There's kind of almost a paladin-esque oath of sorts that one undertakes by becoming a liberator. That there is a goal that you are going to follow, and in some ways it is both magically and socially reinforced by your organization.
Mm-hmm.
Which, again, is something that can do a lot to pull the shape of the narrative in a particular direction.
Yeah, I'm not going to read the whole paragraph, but I think the paragraph on page 68 along the essay, the company you keep, I think is beautifully, it just puts the finest point on the whole thing. If a liberator knowingly partners with a slave or tyrant or active participant in their regime, they immediately lose access to all liberator abilities, knacks, talents, etc. until they atone.
Yeah.
And rightfully
That's
so.
knowingly, and it also says, Game Masters, don't be jerks about this. Yes, it is a difficult situation, and it may be interesting to put them in a difficult situation, but, come on.
Yeah.
The player is choosing this path for their character because they want to explore this, and they want to have access as well, perhaps, to some of the cool toys that are involved. Don't be a jerk and take them away all the time.
Well, and games are supposed to be fun, more often than not. So a little hardship, a little adversity, a little talent crisis maybe. But yeah, don't do this every week like a bad sitcom. A bad sitcom. Anyway, so on to the karma ritual and all the actual mechanics we can get into for the Liberators. I think we've trod a lot of ground here. My favorite part, though, is the fact that this is still based in orc culture, and that any Liberator leader is called a Hezgramond, which is a nice Orzet word. So you got to keep the titles in orc. That's just cool.
Yeah. It's reflecting and honoring the fact that Liberators as a path, even within the changes that we made to it with 4th edition, still has its roots in Hrakagron and Orcish and Carafad culture. It's just something that is potentially open to other people, but there is still a very strong Orcish aspect to it, in much the same way that Sky Raiders, even if they're not necessarily Highland trolls, still have some aspects of its philosophy and underlying magic that are very strongly associated with that culture.
On to the karma ritual, which basically is, as you take on the Liberator path, you get to modify your current karma ritual for your discipline, and now begin to incorporate these symbolic steps in the search for either your own personal freedom or the freedom that you are looking for for other people, a group, whatever, what have you. So that's just something to incorporate into your karma ritual. Whether you share that with a group or not, whatever, if you share that with your game master or not, fine as well, but just something to begin to incorporate and flesh out your character with. You get a new half magic ability. You can use perception-based half magic for information regarding famous tyrants, oppressive regimes, slavers, slavery, common tactics, employees of them, and resistance fighters.
This is the same sort of thing that we've seen with the other paths, that the additional half magic that crops up are things that make sense that they would know as part of the training and knowledge and lore that they pick up in the course of following their path.
Yeah.
Giving people the opportunity to have their characters know things without needing to spend... They're already spending decent amount of resources to follow the path. We don't need them to spend even more resources to pick up knowledge skills that would be something that they would normally have.
Yeah. I can think of a book for reference, Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky from like 1960, whatever, as a nice little starting point. So just something to toss in there. The Liberator itself does have 10 ranks. So this is not one of those that got truncated by a whole lot. At ranks 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, and 10, you all, those along the Liberator path get some bonuses. And these, again, as we have said before, do stack with your discipline bonuses. So as you join a path, most of these will stack up with you here. So rank 2, you get a physical defense bonus. Rank 4, social defense bonus. Rank 6, another physical defense bonus. Rank 8, a recovery test. Rank 9, a social defense bonus. Again, so it's 2 physical, 2 social. And then at rank 10, another recovery test. So not bad to have those there. And now we can get into the talent options list. And this is where we get to have a whole bunch of fun. And then, of course, we won't miss out on this. I'll have Josh go through some knacks at the end of this whole big list, because I think Liberator knacks are kind of some very, very cool ones. So at rank 1, 2, 3, and 4, you get to pick, obviously, 4 of these. And there's a big list here. I think it's like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 10 options, but you get to pick 4. So choose wisely. Air speaking, awareness, if you don't already have it, disguise self, empathic sense, heartening laugh, lock picking, picking pockets, stealthy stride, and the 2 new ones. Sense captive.
Sense captive is a talent that allows the Liberator to magically determine whether there are individuals that are being held against their will within their range. It's within 20 yards times their rank in the talent. It's similar to other detection talents like Sense Horror Spawn and so forth, where they can just sort of magically pick up on that.
Intuit that nicely.
And depending on the number of successes they get, they may learn more information in terms of what's available. Not only where they are, or how far away, but what name giver race they are a part of, what gender they are, their general emotional state, their general physical health, like all sorts of things to get a sense of what's going on. Is the person that you are trying to break out of prison to what extent are they capable of helping in their own escape? Are they physically frail? Are they injured? What kind of situation is going on with that?
Absolutely fair.
Before we get into the other one, the one thing to notice is that while there are some useful kind of combat support talents, Heartening Laugh, for example, there aren't any actual combat talents.
No.
I mentioned earlier when we were talking about Gandhi that if you are playing a character that doesn't have much combat capability to begin with, you can pick up even more stuff and have it not be particularly combat related. There is definitely, I think, a space within what's given here for a social styled liberator, one who is going to be doing a lot more to inspire others or to use things like emotion song or other social talents to influence people's attitudes and drive them to do the things that they need to do to shake off whatever oppression they may be under.
Yeah. And then the last one at rank 1 is Tyranny's Ruin.
Tyranny's Ruin, this is basically a rename of the talent that the Liberator had back in earlier editions where they can store up injury and turn it back.
Was that Horde Blows?
I think that was the original name of it, was Horde Blows, yeah. Basically, if a known tyrant causes damage, the Liberator can make a test against social defense. If successful, they gain +2 success to attack and damage against the target. It must be used by the end of next round. If they suffer a wound, they gain a bonus to their initial test equal to their wound threshold when the wound was caused. So basically, if they cause a wound, you get a huge bonus to your ability to strike back.
So if your wound threshold is 9, you get a +9 bonus.
You would get a +9 if you suffered a wound, yeah.
Ouch. Okay. Yeah, that's good to know.
It is limited to being used once per round.
Still. Still.
Yeah. If you've got a high result, you get +2 per success on your next attack and damage. That is nothing to sneeze at.
No, that is some awesome stuff. So at rank 5, you get 5, 6, 7, 8, 4 of these as well. 1 per rank, of course. Conceal Object, always helpful. Inspire Others, that's the whole point of being the Liberator. Leadership, again, kind of along that path. Power Mask, which is very fun.
Power Mask is an ability, it's a talent that illusionists get access to. A couple of others might as well, but it's primarily illusionists that allows the adept to conceal the fact that they are an adept. It allows them to mask their magical power, which can make it a lot easier to infiltrate a camp or something like that.
Yeah.
Protect yourself from astral sensing that could determine that you are, in fact, more than a mere slave.
Nice. Resist Taunt, which, again, goes hand in hand with...
Obvious defense talent for a Liberator.
No, without a doubt. That needs to be there. And I think this is a holdover as well, but it's beautifully named Shout of Justice. It rings a bell that it's old school. Maybe it's a renamed power.
It's similar. It's basically a variant like Battle Shout / Battle Bellow. The adept makes a test against the highest opposing social defense. If successful, enemies within range suffer -1 per success to their action tests and social defense against fear until the end of the next round, and allies gain +1 per success to 1 test of their choice, and bonuses to social defense and willpower against fear.
Yeah.
It does a little bit more than Battle Bellow. I mean, it's kind of in that same school of inspiration and hindering enemies that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, totally. So at rank 9 and rank 10, you've only got 2 ranks left, and you get 1, 2, 3. You get 4 talent options. So these are also some very cool ones. Escape Plan, Safe Thought, and Thought Link.
Yeah, Escape Plan, I think, shows up in the Companion.
Want to say so.
It's not in Mystic Paths, so it's not a new...
No, I think a thief might get that one.
Yeah, it's a Thief Warden talent option. The Adept, it's a sustained talent, so it takes a little bit of time to focus and do it, but it allows them to determine the best exit from the current confinement.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm in jail. Here is how I am getting out.
Escape from Alcatraz.
It's a base difficulty 6 with a table that has modifiers that add to it.
Yeah.
The more successes that you get, the more bonuses that it provides you in terms of overcoming obstacles that are between you and freedom.
Totally. Safe Thought, I think is...
Safe Thought is a talent available to a few different disciplines. Again, it's a journeyman talent. It provides either bonuses to... it's a free action. It hides thoughts, attitudes, and feelings from telepathic probes or divination magic.
Right.
So it provides a bonus to any defense tests or resistance tests when being targeted by things like empathic sense or interaction tests if people are trying to figure out what you're thinking or doing.
Yeah.
It's a sort of conceal your motives kind of thing.
Which is so perfect for the Liberator. Thought Link, I think, is kind of like the...
Thought Link is another... it's a telepathic connection talent. It's pretty much what it says on the
And
box.
then there's a new one. Liberation.
Liberation allows the adept to rally everyone to break free from their fears and any unnatural influence, to strike back and reclaim their liberty. They make a liberation test against the highest social defense of their allies and opponents within rank times 10 yards. Everyone within range makes one willpower test against all ongoing effects which are unnaturally altering their emotions, whether related to compulsion or fear or causing penalties to social defense, even if a willpower test is not normally allowed.
So, neener.
These tests gain the adept's rank in liberation as a bonus. In addition, affected targets gain +2 to mystic and social defense and willpower test per success against future such effects for a number of rounds equal to the liberation rank. This is basically like a massive dispel fear and bolster
Resolve
ability that allows, at a relatively low difficulty number, given how much you're doing, to just dispel a whole bunch of negative mind control or fear imposing effects and provide some protection against ongoing abilities.
Yeah, badass. Just gonna say that right now. So that's your 10 ranks of Liberator talent options. What kind of knacks you want to throw at the crowd?
Well, let's see. Liberator knacks. By following the Liberator path, you get access to the Liberator talent, which gives you access to the Liberator knacks.
Yeah.
Basically, a bunch of additional ways that you can spend karma. At rank 1, spend karma on tests to gather information about tyrants, tyranny, or slavery. At rank 2, karma on any non-combat related test to free a prisoner or slave. Rank 3, karma on tests to gather, support, or encourage others against a specific tyrant or group of tyrants. Rank 4, karma on tests to remain innocuous but not unseen, such as blending in with a crowd or trying to pass as a slave. Rank 5, karma on any test while enslaved or imprisoned. Rank 7, karma on attack or spellcasting tests against a tyrant. And rank 9 is karma on a damage or effect test against a tyrant.
Nothing bad there.
What were the new talents that they got?
Sense Captive, Tyranny's Ruin, Shout of Justice, or Liberation.
Sense Captive provides access to a bunch of knacks that are also available under Empathic Sense, like Captivity's Mark, Sense Allegiance, things like that. So you can get access to those knacks through either of those abilities.
Yeah.
They also get access to Sense Chattel, which expands specifically to cover the presence and location of name givers held as slaves, and it also increases the range to rank times 50 yards instead of rank times 20. Ooh. So it's basically like a more focused, higher range Sense Captive ability.
Yeah.
Tyranny's Ruin only has a couple of ranks. There's Horde Blows.
There you go.
Which takes the name from the old talent. Normally, Tyranny's Ruin requires you to dump the saved damage right away. Horde Blows allows you to take some blood magic damage to hold onto it up to a year and a day against that target.
Oh, yeah. That'll do you.
Giving access to, I think, what the original Horde Blows did, which always had that ability on it.
That's called Holding the Grudge.
Shared Pain allows the adept using Tyranny's Ruin to take half of the damage that an ally suffers at the hands of a tyrant if they are within range. They need to be attuned through Empathic Sense, so you need to have that connection with them. Yeah. But if you do, then you can take some of that damage that they are taking onto yourself, which, because it also says standard effects, also means that you can then use that to turn that back on the tyrant later on. Gives you an additional source for that. And then Liberator was the third one, right?
Shout of Justice and then Liberation, yes.
Shout of Justice actually does not have any knacks for it. Liberation also does not have any knacks. It's powerful enough as it is without needing
it's okay
to toss knacks onto that.
That's okay.
You get a bunch of karma access, spending karma access stuff. You get some cool access to expansions of your sensing captives ability. You get some extensions to your ability to turn damage back on tyrants and slavers. There's some cool knack options in there.
Well, that's just the knacks for the new stuff. The knacks for all the other talents that are on your list still have a bunch of stuff underneath them as well. So don't think that that's all.
Sure, there may very well be. Yeah, there may very well be knacks under other talents that they get as path talents that might be unique to Liberator or that sort of thing. We're not really going into those.
So, yeah. Any final thoughts on the path of the Liberator? I kind of like the fact that it's now open to everybody. I like its development from
I think that's a good change.
Discipline to a path. And I think that the talent options are well done. The essay was beautiful. I like how all of this turned out.
Yeah. This is one of those paths that can do a lot to indicate the style or direction of game that a player might be interested in. If it's something that the whole group is willing to go along with, can be fantastic.
Yeah.
Whether the rest of the group ends up following the path or not, if they have that shared common goal, and this is something that can be established either in a session 0 or in the ongoing sort of conversation about the game as events unfold and you're dealing with things, it can be really, really interesting. If you do not have a game that is going to be particularly welcoming to what the Liberator is going to be up to, it can be very frustrating. So as a GM, that's something that you'll want to keep in mind if players express interest in that. And again, because all of these paths are something that don't become available until a character hits 5th circle, you should have enough time in advance of that to recognize that's what's going on and perhaps open that communication with your player, but to prepare for NPCs and situations and things like that that might enhance that particular thread of story that you're dealing with.
Absolutely. So until next time, folks, feel free to get a hold of us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com if you have any questions about anything you heard tonight or other examples you'd like to give us of your idea of a Liberator. Maybe we haven't heard of them. Tell us the story. We can go buy a book. I'm happy to read those things.
One last thing to wrap up here. As of right now, as of this release recording, not as of we are recording.
Yes.
As of the release of this episode, there is just over a week left on the Vasgothia Kickstarter.
Oh, I backed that.
This episode is scheduled to release November 10th of 2021. The Vasgothia Kickstarter ends November 19th. If you have not backed that, if somehow you have missed us talking about it, go check that out, Kickstarter.com. Search for Earth Dawn, search for FASA Games, search for Vasgothia.
Yeah.
Go on to the Discord or follow FASA on various social medias. It has been linked there. You should be able to find it and back it. There are both inexpensive tiers that allow you to get just digital versions of things. And of course, whole hog, crazy bananas tiers. If you somehow are just coming back to Earth Dawn and looking to get books, you can add on as much as you want in order to get your collection filled out.
And if you did not hear the last episode of the Vasgothia Kickstarter episode, go back and listen to that. And trust me, you'll want to go get this book.
Yeah, I talked to Nick Lowe, who was one of the primary writers on the Vasgothia book that went up last week. Talked from him about an hour and had a really interesting discussion and a lot of insight into a book that I haven't read yet because I've been working on other stuff.
This will be a surprise to us all. Until next time, folks, great. Go rally to freedom in your own legend.
Good night, everybody.